It's November 24th, 1863. Joe Hooker, the general that completely failed in such a horrific way at Chancellorsville, is now under the command of U.S. Grant here at Chattanooga. Grant, who has ordered his BFF, Sherman, to go ahead and take Missionary Ridge over that way, has told Joe Hooker to come to Lookout Mountain, the highest point in the entire Chattanooga region, heavily defended by Confederate soldiers and artillery. And Grant has told Hooker to simply put upon a demonstration, a hold, so the groups of Confederates here will be distracted by the main assault on Missionary Ridge. But good fortune happens to fall upon Hooker this morning. Fog and low-level clouds have covered most of the mountain, and the Confederates are not seeing Hooker's troops moving up Lookout Mountain in the morning until they get to the Confederate pickets. Caught off guard in a surprise attack, Hooker doesn't just do a demonstration. He fights, and he fights, and he fights uphill, up a mountain. Hooker will push the Confederates off Lookout Mountain, and this part of the battle will be known as the Battle Above the Clouds. And the exhausted general who fought really hard on November 24th will have rightfully earned his nickname, Fighting Joe Hooker.
Charge!
I'm here at Point Park, entrance to Lookout Mountain for the Battle of Chattanooga, which is part of a National Park Service with Chickamuaga and Chattanooga. But first, as always, go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification button so you know about any time I upload these Civil War stories or any conversations with filmmakers from my film study class or recent U.S. history. Grant has moved here to end his campaign in the West. But before he overtakes Chattanooga, we got to do a little rewinding.
It is early in October of 1863, and things are not rosy for General William Rosecrans. He was completely routed at Chickamuaga in the middle of September, and his retreat to Chattanooga is a catastrophic failure. Rosie has allowed the Confederates to take the high ground that surrounded Chattanooga. The well-entrenched Confederates can now lay siege on his army, and the Union is on verge of suffering its greatest defeat of the war, as there appears to be no way to survive the siege. Now, I get that we are skipping right over the important Battle of Chickamauga, but we will cover that in our next chapter. Since this unit is about Grant and his Western campaign, we need to take a look at Chattanooga slightly out of order. President Lincoln and Secretary of War Stanton knows what happens when an army is starved out in a siege. It is forced to surrender. Their man that fights, U.S. Grant, had successfully just captured his second Confederate army, doing that very thing of starving an army out at his siege in Vicksburg. If you recall from our last chapter, the Confederates were even making desperate decisions regarding their horses. Since then, Grant had spent the end of the summer dealing with paroling the nearly 30,000 Confederates at Vicksburg and ensuring the freedom of any slave in the area. However, as disaster is setting in at Chattanooga in mid-October, Grant is ordered to make his way to the Galt House in Louisville, Kentucky for his next orders, although it's not the same hotel we know in downtown because it was destroyed by fire in 1865. At Grant's last train stop to the Ville, he has a very out of breath, rushing to hop on the last second, Secretary Stanton joined the train car with him. Stanton grabbed the hands of Grant's personal doctor and aggressively shook them.
I recognize you from your papers. I'm pleased to meet you.
Wrong person, Mr. Secretary.
Once the proper introductions were finally made, Grant was informed that Lincoln had made him in charge of the entire West, and Stanton was excited to share the news with the country's best general. "Welcome to the Ville, General." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., as news of Grant's promotion became public, President Lincoln was once more approached by those jealous of Grant, and once more they reported that Grant was drunk. Lincoln, who has had enough of a slander, said, "Well, then find out what whiskey is drinking, so I can send a barrel of it to all of the other commanders." And with that bit of wit from old Honest Abe, no one else will approach the president again with rumors of Grant being drunk. Grant immediately turns his attention to Rosecrans' dire situation in Chattanooga, and on the afternoon of October 19th, Grant will wire Rosecrans that he was relieved of command, and Rosecrans' second, George Thomas, will take over Rosey's army. General Thomas was one of the few positives at Chickamuaga for the Union. While Union lines were broke and retreating, Thomas holds his ground, protecting those that were abandoning him and earning the nickname the Rock of Chickamauga. So you can have a mental picture of Thomas. Had he been born around 20 years ago, I would wager that we'd be watching him on a Saturday afternoon, as he would have made for an all-out stud Division I linebacker. Grant wires Thomas that he would be with him shortly, that reinforcements were coming, and to hold the city at all cost. Grant will also inquire how many days' rations Thomas has. Thomas will wire back that he has up to 5 to 7 days of rations, but he will, quote, "hold the town till we starve," close quote. Clearly, Grant has a rock to build upon with Thomas. Grant does not have an army with him, so he's able to make great speed to Thomas's headquarters in Chattanooga and arrive 3 days later. However, a percentage of Thomas's staff were shocked when Grant arrived. They were expecting to see a man the same size of Thomas, if not bigger, a gigantic fighter, the warrior general who they had read about in the papers that had already captured 2 armies. They were expecting a beast. Instead, they were shocked to see a 5'8", 135-pound General Grant walk in. But Grant's small stature was quickly forgotten once he inspiringly shared not only was he going to end a siege, but they were going to take the offense. Within 5 days of Grant's arrival, he already had the siege lines broken and established a line of food, lifting morale of the Union troops. Although it may have been hardtack, yummy, something you get to make, this hard cracker was at least something for the Union troops. Grant's new supply line of hardtack will be affectionately called the Cracker Line. Grant then looked at the geography and noticed the situation he was in. The Tennessee River, yes, the same river that we were on looking at Fort Henry and Shiloh, had him locked in on the west and north. Confederate General Braxton Bragg had his troops on the mountains to the immediate east and south of the city. To the east was the small but steep Missionary Ridge. To the south was Lookout Mountain. Grant knew that Joseph Hooker was en route from D.C. to give him reinforcements, and so he called for his BFF, William Tecumseh Sherman, Cump, to bring his army in for additional support. After a few months of not being with each other, when Sherman arrived on the evening of November 13th, the two sat by the fireplace, smoking cigars, joking on each other, and talking into the night. Grant finally had his army he needs. Sherman, Hooker, and Thomas's armies give him just under 75,000 troops to go on the offensive, just like he promised when he arrived. Meanwhile, Confederate General Braxton Bragg is tearing his army apart. Bragg, who is despised by nearly all of his officers, is having so many arguments with his own men that President Jefferson Davis literally travels to Chattanooga to have an intervention. James Longstreet, Lee's old warhorse, had left Virginia to assist Bragg in the win at Chickamauga. But Longstreet has no patience for the arrogant Bragg, who does not listen to any advice and commands poorly. Davis realizes the atmosphere is toxic, as each officer is pleading for the removal of Bragg. But instead of removing Bragg from command, the president departs back for Richmond and sends Longstreet with his entire army off to try to recapture Knoxville, making Bragg's army much smaller. Now remember, Grant is building his army at the same time Bragg is now losing it by the thousands. But the losses are not over for Bragg yet. Cavalry Commander Nathaniel Bedford Forrest has had enough, and in essence is telling Bragg he's going to go rogue. As he departs with his cavalry, he tells Bragg,
I have stood by your meanness as long as I intend to. You have played the part of a damn scoundrel, and you are a coward. If you were any part of a man, I would slap your jaws and force you to resent it. You may as well not issue any more orders for me, for I will not obey them. And as I say to you, that if you ever again try to interfere with me or cross my path, it will be at the peril of your life.
dude, Forrest is straight up saying he's going to kill you, General. On the morning of November 24th, Grant has developed a three-prong attack against Bragg's well-entrenched and defended Confederates. It is going to be a gutsy attack to make an uphill assault. Now, the main assault was to be led by Sherman on the northern portion of Missionary Ridge, while Thomas was to make a pitch in the center of the ridge. But Grant does not have much expectations from Thomas's army, as they had been whipped at Chickamuaga. It was more of a, well, it's cute you guys are here, but we're going to go ahead and let the big boys fight right now. Come, take it away. Finally, the third prong was to come from Hooker, who was to make a demonstration upon Lookout Mountain. And this brings us to the point where we started today's story off. General Hooker's nickname was Fighting Joe, and for a brief moment in time he was given command of the Army of the Potomac to defeat Lee in Virginia. Before he even fired one shot, he boasted, "May God have mercy on Bobby Lee, for I will have none." But Hooker failed miserably at Chancellorsville in May of 1863, and now he is here with Grant, and he needs to get the badge of failure from Chancellorsville off his chest. Again, it's just to be a demonstration to keep the Confederates on Lookout Mountain from joining the fight. But Hooker has some good fortune, as both heavy fog and low-level clouds have obscured his entire division's movement from the Confederates. Hooker sees the clouds will in essence create a sneak attack for him, and instead of making a demonstration, Hooker, Fighting Joe Hooker, makes a full-out assault. With a rifle in one hand and the other hand either grabbing a tree or a rock, Joe Hooker's men are having to come up Lookout Mountain in a very difficult terrain against Confederate positions right where I'm standing. I mean, look at these. You've got to keep going all up, and that's to a small little stopping point, and then it continues to go. It's nothing but up. It's a mountain. I'm trying to imagine what Hooker's men had to be feeling like. Now, granted, they had fog and clouds giving them somewhat of camouflage, but they're climbing up these, and at the same time, it's going to take a couple hand use, but you got to carry your gun with you, and they're getting shot at. There's not a lot that scares me. Matter of fact, horror films are my favorite genre for the most part. I really love a good scary movie. That feeling you get in your chest when your adrenaline's going. Horror film makes you know you're alive.
But I'm not scared of snakes or spiders, really. Clowns don't freak me out. And I know some of you get really heaved out by clowns. But ticks? Oh my gosh, those things freak me out. They are scary. And I've already pulled 2 off. Because, they're tiny, tiny little bugs that suck on your blood, latching their head inside you. And if you pull them out incorrectly, their head snaps off in your body, and then you get like Lyme disease and really sick and die. Might be a little over dramatic. So yeah, that scares me. But my gosh, another thing, hookers men are marching up this mountain with 50 pounds of weight, a gun, people shooting at them. And I'm sweating just walking up. So on this clear, sunshiny day, you can maybe get why when the clouds up there are down here, why this would be known as the Battle Above the Clouds.
And with a tenacious spirit, Joseph Hooker's troops have pushed the Confederates off Lookout Mountain, raising the stars and stripes so all in the valley can see.
So while Hooker was fighting Joe Hooker up here on Lookout Mountain, Kump over there on Missionary Ridge was having a devils of a day again, and it wasn't going well for him.
Sherman's struggles are due to having poor maps and not being familiar with the area. Sherman is not even engaging in battle in the area he's supposed to be at. And at the end of his first day of fighting, he has not met his objective, as the Confederates are still heavily entrenched on Missionary Ridge. George Thomas's small pitch in the center, though, has had some massive good luck. The Confederate center did not realize a massive assault was taking place to their north with Sherman and to their south on Lookout Mountain. When the first line of defenses see Thomas's division making movements, the Confederates thought, cool, the Union Army must be doing a formal parade of review. And so they took a seat to watch the festivities. The unsuspecting Confederates were caught off guard when the parade transitioned into an attack, and the Confederates retreated further up Missionary Ridge. And this is how we come to the end of a day for November 24th. Grant has a bit of good news, bad news. The good news is Hooker has the stars and stripes on top of Lookout Mountain, and Thomas has pushed the Confederate center back a bit on Missionary Ridge. The bad news is Sherman's main assault, though, did not meet the objective. On the morning of the 25th, Grant ordered all 3 of his commanders to take Missionary Ridge. Hooker was to follow up his success by moving off Lookout Mountain and taking the southern portion of Missionary Ridge. BFF Sherman was to take the northern portion of the ridge. Grant, however, still did not have much faith in Thomas's division, and so in a way, they're going to sit in a holding pattern at the center. But then Grant realizes he needs Thomas, as BFF Sherman's troops were struggling to get up the steep Missionary Ridge, which I'm going to walk up now.
Okay, I'm at the top. Took me not too long. But real quickly, what was my one fear? One fear. Remember? One fear. Ticks. Ticks. That's my one fear. And I gotta walk through this tall crap to get there? What do you think this is? This is gonna be like a tick war zone, probably. Oh, God. I don't like ticks at all. They freak me out.
Uncharacteristically, Sherman is struggling on the northern portion of the battlefield, which is not even the Confederate stronghold. The Confederate center was believed to be the strongest point of the Confederate line, with a series of rifle pits and artillery going all the way up along the ridge. To relieve pressure on Sherman, Grant challenged Thomas to simply take the first line of Confederate defenses, but Grant was still not sure that they could do it. Thomas's men, though, did not like being dissed by Grant, and as they attacked, they noticed the Confederates were far weaker than anyone had expected. Once Thomas's men took the first line of guns, they found confidence in themselves and they did not stop. Instead of taking pressure off Sherman, they instead charged up more. Thomas's corps of Midwestern boys kept moving up the mountain, pushing all the way to the top.
So we're here on the center of Missionary Ridge. This is where Braxton Bragg, arguably one of the worst generals ever, not just one of the worst generals in the Confederacy, not one of the worst generals in the Civil War, not just one of the worst generals in American history, probably arguably one of the worst generals of all time. I mean, he's bad, really, really bad. Anyways, he's made his headquarters here on laying his siege of Chattanooga. Now let's real quick. He does win. He beats Rosecrans. So what's that say about Rosecrans? He beats Rosecrans down over at Chickamuaga. But his objective wasn't to win just Chickamauga. His objective was to reclaim the vital junction of Chattanooga. And he doesn't. He fails to do that. So is Chickamauga a real victory? It's debatable. Debatable. Anyways, so he comes here, he's laying siege on Chattanooga, and he does it as a poor job. Grant breaks the cracker line within 5 days of his arrival. And just right over there, on that side of me, is Lookout Mountain. Hooker's already taken that. Coming along over this way on Missionary Ridge is Sherman's troops, but he's struggling. Kump is having a hard time getting up to this part of the ridge. But right here is the rocks.
As Thomas's men were advancing on Confederate lines, they realized they were causing the Confederates to retreat en masse. To keep their momentum going all along the line, you could hear the Union soldiers chanting, "Chickamauga, Chickamauga." They were clearly making a hell of a comeback. At a make-or-break point for the Union assault, the regimental color bearer of a 24th Wisconsin was shot and killed. A young 18-year-old named Arthur MacArthur grabbed the colors and shouted, "On Wisconsin!" rallying the troops to keep moving forward. MacArthur will lead a charge, carrying the regimental flag to the top of the ridge, planting it into the crest of the hill as the attack pushed the Confederates into a full retreat. MacArthur will receive the Medal of Honor for his heroics. For college sports fans, the first words of the University of Wisconsin's fight song? On Wisconsin. Just quickly, P.S. MacArthur will end up being the father of legendary General Douglas MacArthur as well. Although at first this all frustrated that his orders were not followed, Grant found himself gleefully watching Thomas's division not just hit those first rifle pits like ordered, but literally breaking Bragg's complete center, forcing the Confederates into a full retreat from Chattanooga.
So why? Why is this battle so important? What is it that you really need to understand? Well, one, Grant's victory here is going to cause Washington to say, you know what? He's a fighter. We've known this for some time now. We want him in control of the entire U.S. Army. And they are going to take him from the west here and take him out east, where he will be in Virginia, leading the Army of the Potomac there, and eventually winning the war. So that's one huge thing. It just shows that, he's able logistically to lead. He has great rapport with his officers, and when the going goes against him, he remains calm. And all these battles we've looked at, and he figures out a way, under calmness, how to succeed. Another thing that we need to know about Chattanooga is it is a huge logistical hub for the Confederacy, but also now it's going to be a logistical hub for the Union now that it's in Union hands. Sherman is going to use Chattanooga as his winter camp of 64, and in the spring of 65, it's going to be the thing that springboards him into Georgia. From here, he's going to go into Georgia, he's going to take Atlanta, he's going to march to the sea, and eventually he's going to bring himself back up into the Carolinas. He's able to do this because he has Chattanooga right here as his launching port. Braxton Bragg, who this is his headquarters, well, things aren't going to go so good for him.
You would think when all of his officers are begging for him to be fired, Jefferson Davis would have relieved Bragg of command, but he didn't. However, now that Bragg has lost what was considered an unbeatable line of defense and is in full retreat, the losing general will resign on his own. Yet, Davis still keeps the bumbling general on staff as his military advisor for all military operations. At this point, you deserve what you get, Mr. Davis. Eventually, in a bit of desperation as the Confederates are on the ropes in the early months of 1865, Bragg is once more given a command, and once more he pretty much fails at leading troops. Post-war, he will work for an insurance company, the city of Mobile, Alabama, and then a railroad company, in which he leaves all three of them shortly after employment for, get this, being disagreeable. Oddly, the Egyptian army offered him a position after the war, but he turned it down, so probably good fortune on their end. Bragg will die at the age of 59 in 1876, and for some reason I do not understand, the United States Army, at the end of World War I, named their brand new fort that they had built in North Carolina Fort Bragg. Arguably one of the worst generals ever, and he gets a fort named after him. What? The casualties at Chattanooga for the Union were just over 5,800, whereas the Confederates suffered almost 6,200 casualties. But the biggest loss for the Confederacy will be the abandonment of Chattanooga. I can't stress enough how economically important the city was due to having the Tennessee River as one highway and the essential railroad hub as the other major way of transport. Meanwhile, old Pete Longstreet, who had taken 15,000 to 17,000 troops with him, creating a huge what if he had stayed around and helped Bragg question, was up in Knoxville, getting whipped on by our favorite facial hair commander, Ambrose Burnside. Longstreet made a series of assaults over 2 weeks, but continued to be defeated, badly. How much so? Well, for example, the final day's assault on November 29th, Longstreet lost nearly 900 men in 20 minutes. Burnside lost just 13. Longstreet wasn't beating on a dead horse. He was betting on one.
All right, guys, I am here with Ranger Chris Young here at Lookout Mountain with the National Park Service, and Chris is going to answer a couple questions for us about the battle here at Chattanooga.
Again, you hit the nail on the head when you talk about logistics. We often go to battlefields and we don't think about everything that is poured into getting an army to a battlefield, sustaining an army in a campaign. It's not just, hey, we're going to fight a battle. I mean, how much food do you have to have? Not only for soldiers, but how much food do you have to have for your animals? Because you have thousands upon thousands. I mean, just around the time of the Battle of Chickamuaga, the U.S. Army is about 60,000 men, almost 45,000 horses and mules. And so, you're looking at tons of food for soldiers and for animals. And so I think that when we look at Chattanooga, we have to think of that hub. I always liken it to a heart with the spokes of the arteries coming out of it, or spokes of a wheel coming out with the railroads. And so not just the Tennessee River. I mean, the Tennessee River is vastly important, but the direct line to be able to keep those logistical supplies coming are the railroads. and specifically for Sherman here in the spring of 1864, after Grant has moved on from southeast Tennessee and taken command of all U.S. forces and is now with Meade's army in Virginia, Sherman is left behind here in Chattanooga to make the move on Atlanta. And for him to march into North Georgia, into Confederate territory, he is going to need some logistical support, and he's going to need that transportation for his supplies, for his men, for his material to be able to move from point to point quickly. And so the railroad hub here in Chattanooga, there are 4 railroads that will radiate into the Deep South. Primary to Sherman will be the Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad. And so the Nashville and Chattanooga leaves Chattanooga, heads to Bridgeport, Alabama, west of the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee, in North Alabama, and then heads north to Nashville. From Nashville, he goes to Louisville, and then Louisville, and this isn't just the Nashville and Chattanooga, you're going to different rail networks. So you've got a rail network out of Nashville to Louisville, from Louisville to Cincinnati, Ohio. And so you're moving supplies from northern states and areas on the rail lines through Kentucky, down into Tennessee to North Alabama, which is held by the U.S. Army, and then here to Chattanooga, where it's going to be stockpiled up. And then the Western and Atlantic Railroad, another local railroad, is going to take you down to the rear of Sherman's army as he's marching to Atlanta. So the 2 major Chattanooga railroads coming into play, the Nashville and Chattanooga, and the Western and Atlantic. And so from Nashville, you'll bring supplies into the city, and then out of the city on the W&A, or the Western and Atlantic, you'll take supplies down to the rear of Sherman's army. And that's also very important because on Christmas Day of 1863, the National Cemetery is open here in Chattanooga. And so on a daily basis, you're going to have wounded soldiers being sent from the front back to Chattanooga. Okay. And so on a daily basis, those trains from Sherman's army are going to be vastly important to get wounded men back to the city as well. So it's kind of a 2-way street. Supplies to Sherman's army, wounded and sick soldiers from his army back up to Chattanooga and the hospitals. And I think that it's what I challenge a lot of people to do at the end of programs that I give, of this is their place. I mean, this is your place, you own it. I mean, this is the country's park. And we sometimes need to be reminded that when we're heading to Florida, when we're experiencing the freedoms that we experience on a daily basis here in the United States, that it comes at a cost. And instead of us often thinking about the cost of, say, Iwo Jima or Okinawa, or cost of D-Day, or Normandy Beach, that we think of, or the Meuse Argonne in World War I, it's right here. It's on our front doorsteps. And so if you get a chance to come and visit, not only might you have a personal connection to that place, do you know 100% that you didn't have a relative that stepped foot here, that helped change the tide of the country, but that when these battles were being fought, not everyone experiences the freedoms that we experience today, even then, a short 158 years ago. And so these are tumultuous battles and campaigns that help shape who we are. And for us to get a better understanding of who we were and what shaped us as a country, we need places like this. We need that story. We often need to be hit in the face with it, to say, this isn't a serene, beautiful place. It is a beautiful view, but for us to say that this is a place of suffering. This is a place where women became widows, where children became orphans, and at what cost? At the end of it all, to free 4 million people and their children and their children's children, so that they wouldn't have to feel the cold shackles of slavery or be sold away from their families. And so I think that with the death and destruction that comes from the war, and the lives lost on both sides of the war, that it gives us an ability to reflect and to ask ourselves very difficult questions of, if we forget places like this, if we don't come to places like this, if we don't challenge ourselves at places like this and look at our own history in the face up front, good, bad, and indifferent, then who are we going to become in the future? Because who we are in the past individually, the choices that we've made, they are the choices that make us who we are today, and that will help forge our direction in the future. Same thing, if we don't know where we came from collectively and the hardships that this country has faced collectively, and we don't listen to that and study that and really debate that, and it's hard, it's harsh. We have to be able to do that, to really make very critical decisions of how do we get here, why are we here, and then what can we learn from that to make decisions about which direction and which path should we go in the future. Everything is at stake on that. And if we don't have history, if we don't have the ability to visit places and ask those questions, then the question is that what will the end story be? So that's why I would stop. I would stop because it's your story, and it's your place, and you need to know who you are.
All right, Chris, thank you so
you're
much.
welcome.
I
Thanks
really
for coming out.
appreciate you sharing your insight. And as a former social studies teacher, nicely done.
Exactly.
Boom.
And
So-
come out and see us.
All right, guys, this has been quite the adventure. I gotta say, I appreciate you being along on this journey as we have done Grant's campaign in the West. We've seen Fort Donelson. Can't see Fort Henry anymore because, it's underwater. We were at Shiloh, bloody Shiloh, a place of peace. The historic and beautiful park of Vicksburg, and now we're wrapping up here at Chattanooga. And I will have one little bonus feature on the way home. I'm going to stop off at Murfreesboro at Stones River. This trip, this awesome trip that I have been on, has been one heck of a road trip, was made in special part because a former student, General Hancock, that's his nickname, he nominated me for a Toyota Thank a Teacher Award, which provided a grant to cover this trip, which is huge. So a huge thanks to General Hancock, not the one that's going to be out in Gettysburg, but the one that was in my classroom. It means a lot that you took the time to thank me. If you're a student of mine, thanks for the stuff that you do to just make my world better. If you're somebody that's just came across my channel, and welcome to my class first, and all of you, think of ways that you can thank your teachers, because I was able to do this because one former student thought of me and sent this nomination in. So it makes a difference. Think of ways you can thank your teachers as well. All right, as always, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button. Leave a comment below. This is, maybe you have a comment about the entire trip. Maybe you have a comment about Grant. Again, there's huge consequences both for the Confederacy and the Union on this battle here. And with that, guys, we're coming to a close on this chapter. There is that one bonus. Thanks for being along the ride. As always, remain awesome, be nice, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. As we're on Missionary Ridge, and Chattanooga's right over there, and Lookout Mountain's just over there. Missionary Ridge is all residential. Some really nice houses here. I'd probably really like a house here because, who wouldn't want a cannon in your side yard? But question, I don't know. I want wonder if these houses, and all along, I wonder if they have ghosts. I mean, there's a lot, there's people that died all along here.